Kia ora koutou, my name is Colin MacLeod. I'm the Director for the National Centre of Religious Studies, and it's my pleasure to present a little PLD snippet on See Judge Act for you. So I know many of you will be familiar with this, and I encourage you to look at the notes for Phase of Learning 2, and the theme being church. It's the second set A, See Judge Act. And even if you are looking at this as seniors or teaching of seniors, then I encourage you to read these notes for some more background. See Judge Act was developed by Cardinal Joseph Cardine in the 20s. He had been working with and was working with youth workers, people that were coming up with some really complex and difficult situations, and he saw that they needed a process to support them in making well-informed, Christ-centered decisions. You'll be familiar with it already, I'm sure. It's strong in the Caritas Aotearoa resources, and I encourage you to go looking for those too. One of the critical areas that backs this is that justice isn't just an add-on to Catholic understandings. The Synod of Bishops wrote this in 1971 in their document, Justice in the World. What it highlights is that you can't rock on up to Mass and have no sense of justice and feel that you are actually meeting what Christ is asking of you. It's a fundamental element of being Catholic, is being a person of justice, or at least trying to be. So in our resources, we make a particular focus on the seeing dimension of See Judge Act, but also in terms of understanding what CST is, Catholic social teaching is, particularly in the light of Christ. So while Caritas has a wonderful idea of unlocking Catholic social teachings, those 9 critical principles, NCREs have developed that a little as well. So what we've added is this sense of our young people shining a torch into a space where there is not Catholic social teaching. So principles, participation, common good, distributive justice, preferential option for the poor, subsidiarity, solidarity, the quest for peace, and stewardship, care for our environment, all of which emanate from that sense of human dignity. So we're thinking if we can equip the kids, if you can work with our young people and equip them with that language of Catholic social teaching, what they can then become attuned to is shining that teaching into situations they come across. How wonderful would it be for our kids to actually think, actually, there's a sense of common good that's missing here that needs to be brought in. There's a sense of people's voices not being heard, subsidiarity that needs to take place. We can shine that into that place. So, for example, we're encouraging you when working with the young people, this is linked in our resources, certainly in the background notes, to say to your young people, well, there's a situation going on, use your human dignity torch or your subsidiarity torch or your common good torch, and shine that around, and what do you see? And if you see that these things are missing, then you can use your torch to shine the light of that principle into that situation. It's perhaps a little bit of a difficult concept, but it's certainly something that is dynamic rather than something that the young people are doing in their heads. It's something that they'll actually be doing with their hearts, minds, and actions. So out of that flows this connection to See Judge Act. I'm emphasizing in this clip that it is Catholic social teaching. You will be conscious that justice is a word that's used broadly in secular circles and in various religious contexts. For us, Catholic social teaching is centered in Christ. So when we ask the young people to see what's going on in a particular situation, we're asking them to really deeply consider what do they see happening with people here. And the notes encourage them to ask questions like, who is involved? What's the person's name? How old are they? What ability or disability do they have? What's gone before? What sort of history is part of the situation? Is there a cultural significance? Is there power involved here? And there always is. What sort of status does the person have? What sorts of challenges are there? So what exactly is going on? What actual words are being used? And who's being hurt and in what ways? Now, we're not expecting you to have young people memorize these questions. We're wanting you to help equip our young people to have a whole plethora of questions that they can ask into a situation to actually see what is going on. The notes mention, that saying that there are none so blind who will not see. The flip side of that coin is that in actual fact, it's very difficult for our young people and for us to really see what's going on. We can often react very quickly and miss the reality of the situation. So the second main question we're asking is, what do the people see happening around what's going on? So it's not just what is, if you like, within the frame of what they're seeing, but what is it that's happening as well? Like how are people responding to the situation that's going on? How their friends or classmates are responding can feed into the situation as well. What about family that are at home? If you think of, say, a refugee family or so, what's happening in the background that with this behaviour that might be happening in a classroom or a playground? What else is going on? And then finally, what do I see within myself in this situation? It's very easy to decide on what's going on based on my own prejudices and misunderstandings. It's not necessarily always wrong, because we bring all of our experiences, we bring all of our contexts. The challenge of entering into see, judge, act and the see dimension is to look deeply into what's happening and encourage our young people to not just leap at the first thing that jumps out at them. In terms of judge, there's three dimensions that we at NCRS have sort of picked up on. Consulting is really critical. They need to ask people what their own thoughts are. Now, a usual place to begin is friends, depending on the situation. Sometimes young people won't want to talk to their friends about something. But often friends represent a similar mindset. And often what they might say is influenced by that relationship, as with all things that people say, are influenced by the relationships. So we're not saying for them to not ask their friends. It's great that they ask their friends for some advice on a situation that they're struggling to deal with. But we also want to highlight the fact that they can ask family. We also want to just acknowledge that sometimes families are the same. They think in similar ways, and other people can challenge us to help our whānau grow by getting other ideas as well. Trusted adults are critical. Teachers are a key part of this in schools. The parish priest, other sports coaches, other people that they may come across, they're to be encouraged to actually reach out. This is an excellent opportunity to talk with young people about what they can trust on the web and what they can trust in terms of literature and news and commentary, social commentary, and how challenging that is. They're to really be encouraged to look at scripture, to actually think in terms of the stories that they already know of Jesus and how that might have impact, but also perhaps to sit down and read some texts and reflect on them, probably with guidance from an adult, unless they're really familiar with some of them. And the principles of Catholic social teaching that they are learning, that we are hoping you are supporting them to embed in their understandings. So while big terms like distributive justice and common good are challenging, we want our young people to be equipped with the ideas that sit behind them so that they can apply it when they're faced with a situation such as we're talking about with See Judge Act. It's utterly critical that they take time. Knee-jerk reactions are sometimes necessary. Sometimes things need to be dealt with quickly, but they can also be revisited. And if healing is to happen and forgiveness is to happen and understanding is to happen, nearly always that takes time to reflect and often time to pause before making that judgment. It's why it's part of this process. So thinking something through, letting it roll around their minds, equip them with the idea that that is okay, not just okay, but it's actually to be encouraged. And sometimes with judge, because it seems a harsh word, this isn't judging as in that negative elements of, judging one another and putting them down. This is in the sense of weighing up in a really positive concept. Thinking about how God judges us isn't a God who is wanting us to be put under the spotlight and found wanting. That is not God's desire. God judges us, as we understand from Catholic social teaching, teachings of the church. God judges us based on the goodness that is within us, that goodness that is shared from God, that holiness, that grace that is shared from God with us, and where that is evident. So we too, in this context of judging, are bringing to mind with our young people this idea that you need to weigh something up and to make a decision based on sound ideas, sound understandings. So one of the simple ways that we can do that is by encouraging them to pray about it, to pray to Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And it can be as simple as, what should I do? Or to pray to help me understand. Or to pray that their heart is filled with a sense of justice, with a sense of compassion, with a sense of aroha, tika, pono. And their prayer may be as simple as, help me to respond like you want me to, O God, or like you would respond, Jesus. And I think some of these, the idea is that they could be equipped with some of these so that they've practiced them in the classroom, and then they can deploy them when the situation actually happens. It's a way of not just giving time and reflection opportunities, it's a way of actually doing that thinking and reflecting with God. It's at the core of Cardine's concept. To leave out the spiritual connection with God is to not actually do see, judge, act. And then it seems obvious, but I always used to say to young people when I was teaching them, when you're on this process, it's actually impossible not to do something. Because if you decide not to act, it's a decision, even if you don't feel like it's a decision. If you just let the problem sit and fester or dissipate, then that is an actual action. So what we're wanting young people to think about is, even if that is the action that they end up doing, that their choice was involved. So what exactly is it that we want to change is critical, because it can be very easy to just put your hands in your pocket and dish out some money and say, okay, that's it, I am helping whatever situation, if it's a poverty situation overseas or something like that. And the process, of course, leads us to answering these questions. So what action we going to take? Sometimes the group action can be different from the personal action. And sometimes a decision to do something as, say, a whole class, young people can actually feel disconnected from that. So you want to encourage them to realize that the action they're going to take is something that is collective in terms of them as a group of individuals. And then to look at ways that they can stay involved and be involved. It depends, of course, on the situation. But often in this process, young people, if they're taking sort of a secular understanding, it's just a series of steps rather than an engagement with the situation, with the people involved in the situation, with that relationship with God involved in that as well. We want to encourage them to actually think about how they are involved. Then they need to do it. The action needs to happen. It's really critical, if you are working through with young people a see, judge, act and trying to embed this in their lives, that they see that something happens as a result. And then we have highlighted in this little model that we are presenting in the background notes and in our resources, it's really important at some stage to ask what worked. And the flip side of the same coin is what didn't work and why. So, for example, if a whole lot of money is raised and given to a cause, it makes sense to try and find out whether or not that money was put to any action itself. The giving of the money wasn't what you were trying to achieve usually. The giving of the money is the method by which you can make a positive impact on an issue of injustice. And so asking the question, how did it help, can help. Like, what I have in the back of my mind is I remember reading a long time ago about a group of people that organised for pumps, water pumps, to go into parts of Africa. And the pumps effectively pulled the water out of the ground. It was used for crops, but it wasn't replenished. So in actual fact, the action of justice undermined the health of the people and had quite serious long-term consequences. So getting our young people with See, Judge, Act to reflect on how, in fact, something positive comes of it helps them to make better decisions, to see better, to judge better, and to act better in the future. And part of the review is what would I do differently next time? And this may be small or major. So a critical area for this is that it's a whole process. It's not just about the action, and we can often encourage young people to quickly move to an action. You know, two people having a fight in a playground, a quick conversation, shake hands as though it's all made up. Now, of course, sometimes that's all that there is time for. But if we're trying to embed this concept of see, judge, act, we want to revisit that later. Or at the time, make a little bit of time to say, okay, well, we haven't finished. We're going to come back to this and we're going to look at how see, judge, act can help us in terms of the next steps. And be very conscious that you haven't turned this process into something that is completely disassociated from the person of Jesus. You actually need to be using Jesus language through it. What would Jesus do? Because Jesus has told us that we should love one another, we are loving one another. Because Jesus was a person of forgiveness, we are going to engage with forgiveness. And we also need to be really, really careful that our social justice practices don't replace the religious understandings that are involved with Catholic social teaching. And I've seen a number of schools pat themselves rightly enough on the back for having wonderful, beautiful, people-centered justice programs, but they may have nothing whatsoever to do with Christ in the young people's minds. They may have nothing to do with the fact that this is Catholic social teaching. You know, it's possible for young people to get up and talk about all the great things that they are doing and think that they're doing it despite the fact that it's a Catholic school, rather than because it's a Catholic school. We have to use Jesus-centered language to embed that in their hearts and minds. And I think one of the ways that we can also embed the idea that prayer is something that is part of our daily life is to help them to reflect on the fact that actions themselves are a form of prayer. When you reach out to somebody to show them compassion, to be a person of justice, you are actually praying. So just this last step before you think on some of this as a staff, as an individual, for me, the centering gospel passage for See, Judge, Act is this. Remember, we see a scene painted for us where Jesus unrolls a scroll. Jesus, our brother, Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, the model for us. He unrolls a scroll and reads out to those people gathered in their place of worship. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. When we are supporting our young people and equipping themselves with the See, Judge, Act process, they are bringing good news to the poor. And the poor might be the bully in the classroom who's made their lives miserable, but they're trying to work out a way that come with a new way of being for things to be much better than they are for that person as well as for themselves. Those that are captives of their small thinking, perhaps, their sadness and anger, captive by their frustrations, the blindness that can happen through just not taking the time or the courage to look at a situation and see what is really going on. There's freedom that comes from See, Judge, Act because people are empowered, our young people are empowered to see with the eyes of God and to see anew. I think nearly always there is something that is surprising that comes with these processes. So the concept of the year of the Lord's favour is that this isn't just about dealing with a bunch of negative issues, examples of injustice. What See, Judge, Act can support is bringing about a world that is blessed, in a local world for the people's own situations, their school, their home, whatever environments they find themselves in, but also a sense that God's grace, God's forgiveness, compassion, justice, mercy, pono, tika, araha, they can be supported by this process. So now your turn. So I challenge you to pause the video in a minute, maybe collectively or individually think for a while and then maybe share. If you've got time, look at the background notes. They can be really useful in terms of contextualizing this again for you. Then have a conversation of how you worked through the process. Take your time with this and discuss what questions did you ask at the time, if you can remember. What other questions you think you might have asked, particularly if you're thinking of something where it didn't work out as well as you had hoped. Ask yourself where Jesus was in the process, perhaps only in your mind, perhaps actually just sitting outside of the room because you are so engaged, as I have often been, with a tricky situation that it didn't really enter my head to pray even silently or quickly about it. And then discuss to what surprised you in this process. And then finally, I challenge you to discuss how this process can be embedded throughout the school. I would argue that if See, Judge, Act is only part of an RE lesson, then don't bother teaching it. The only point of this existing in the curriculum, to Tātou Whakapono, our faith, is because we believe, as a number of people that we consulted believe, if we can equip our young people with See, Judge, Act as something that is meaningful and active in their lives, they will be powerfully able to deal with a number of situations that they might not otherwise do it. Doesn't mean that it'll always work perfectly, but it's a wonderful tool for centering them on what is actually going on, the capacity to be able to see, the capacity to be able to weigh something up, and the capacity to be able to do something. See, Judge, Act, I think, should be evident in every day of school life. But that's the challenge for you and for me in my own life. So pause here and good luck with your conversation.